This is my ranking of World War II games that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how immersive the WWII setting feels, how solid the combat and tactics are, and how well each game captures the intensity of the battlefield. Let's get straight into the list. Hell Let Loose was very different from the World War II shooters I usually play because every match demanded patience, teamwork, and careful positioning instead of constant action. I spent a lot of time studying the map, choosing where to spawn, and moving with my squad as we pushed toward objectives across huge battlefields. What stood out most was how dangerous every fight felt since a single bullet could end a good run in seconds. The realistic visuals, detailed environments, and battlefield sounds created a strong sense of being part of a larger conflict. At the same time, the long walks between battles sometimes slowed the pace more than I wanted. Even with that issue, the scale, atmosphere, and tactical depth kept me invested, which is why it lands in my good tier. Call of Duty World at War was the game that reminded me why the World War II setting became so popular in the first place. I liked how the campaign showed both the Pacific battles and the fighting in Europe, which kept the locations feeling varied. The action stayed fast, but the darker tone, heavier violence, and constant sense of danger made the war feel harsher than many shooters from the same period. I also noticed that enemy soldiers behaved differently depending on who I was fighting, which added variety to firefights. The missions rarely slowed down, and memorable moments kept appearing without overstaying their welcome. Even years later, the campaign, atmosphere, and presentation still hold up remarkably well. That quality secures a place in my excellent tier. Foxhole felt less like a traditional World War II game and more like stepping into a massive war machine where every player had a job to do. I spent time helping with logistics, moving supplies, and supporting the front line before joining the fighting myself. What stood out was how much teamwork mattered because even simple tasks could influence the larger conflict. Battles could be chaotic, but there was also room for planning, scouting, and unexpected moments that developed naturally between players. I liked seeing entire offensives take shape through the actions of hundreds of people rather than scripted events. The scale of the war was impressive, though the slower pace and heavy reliance on cooperation were not always what I wanted. Even so, it earns its spot in my good tier. Enlisted stood out because it combined large World War II battles with a squad system that kept me involved even after getting eliminated. Instead of waiting to respawn, I could immediately switch to another soldier and stay in the fight, which made battles feel more active. I liked the variety of infantry, tanks, and aircraft, along with the detailed recreations of famous locations from the war. The historical atmosphere was strong, and many maps captured the feeling of major battles better than some bigger shooters. At the same time, certain mechanics felt rough, especially when dealing with ammunition shortages or vehicle management. Even with those frustrations, there was always something happening on the battlefield, and the mix of scale, action, and authenticity was enough to earn my good tier. Hearts of Iron 4 was less about fighting individual battles and more about controlling every part of a nation's war effort, which made each campaign feel like a massive project. I spent as much time managing industry, research, production, and military planning as I did watching armies move across the map. What kept me coming back was how different every playthrough could become, especially when history started going in unexpected directions. One campaign could follow real events while another could turn into a completely different version of World War II. The amount of freedom was impressive, and I enjoyed seeing long-term decisions shape the outcome of entire wars. The learning curve was steep, and some systems felt overwhelming at first, but the depth and replay value were hard to ignore. That is enough for my great tier. Day of Infamy captured the tension of World War II combat better than most multiplayer shooters I played because every push toward an objective felt dangerous. I spent a lot of time moving carefully through buildings, listening for footsteps, and checking every corner before advancing. What stood out most was the atmosphere, from soldiers shouting orders to artillery crashing nearby and bullets snapping past cover. The class system also encouraged teamwork, with each role bringing something useful to the battlefield. I enjoyed coordinating attacks, supporting teammates, and adapting to different situations depending on what the team needed. The slower pace may not appeal to everyone, but it made every victory feel more meaningful. The combination of immersion, teamwork, and battlefield intensity earns it a spot in my excellent tier. Squad 44 delivered the kind of World War II experience that rewarded patience, teamwork, and communication far more than individual skill. I spent a lot of time moving with my squad, helping capture objectives, and setting up positions that made it easier for our team to stay in the fight. What stood out most was how immersive the battles felt once everyone started working together and communicating through the in-game systems. The sound design, detailed battlefields, and realistic weapon handling all helped create a strong sense of being part of a larger military operation. I also liked how building forward positions added another layer of strategy beyond simply attacking objectives. The smaller player base held it back somewhat, but the teamwork and atmosphere were enough to secure my good tier. Red Orchestra: Two Heroes of Stalingrad was the kind of shooter that demanded patience because running into battle without thinking usually ended with a quick trip back to the spawn screen. I had to pay attention to positioning, cover, and teamwork far more than in most World War II shooters. What stood out was how realistic everything felt, from managing ammunition and weapon handling to surviving artillery strikes and machine gun fire. The battles were intense because every life mattered, and even a small mistake could completely change the outcome of a fight. I also liked how leadership and communication played a major role instead of individual players carrying entire matches. The steep learning curve will not suit everyone, but the realism, atmosphere, and tactical depth make it worthy of my great tier. Battlefield 1942 opened my eyes to just how much variety a World War II multiplayer game could offer, when so many different roles, vehicles, and battlefields were available in a single experience. I loved the freedom to switch between infantry combat, tank warfare, aerial dogfights, and naval battles depending on what the situation demanded. Every map had its own identity, which meant I was constantly adapting my approach instead of repeating the same tactics. What stood out most was how unpredictable matches became once dozens of players started fighting over objectives across massive battlefields. Some of my favorite moments came from battles that changed direction multiple times before a winner finally emerged. The variety, scale, and influence it had on multiplayer shooters are exactly why it belongs in my masterpiece tier. Sniper Elite 5 approached World War II from a different angle by focusing more on stealth, planning, and precision than large-scale battles. I spent most missions studying enemy positions, setting up long-range shots, and finding creative ways to complete objectives without raising alarms. The open-ended level design was what I liked most, because it allowed me to approach the same mission in several different ways. Whether I was using traps, distractions, or carefully timed sniper shots, the game encouraged experimentation. I also enjoyed the invasion system, which added unexpected tension whenever another player entered my campaign. Not every mission focused heavily on sniping, and some sections leaned more toward close-quarters action than I preferred. Even with that drawback, the freedom and replay value were enough to place it in my good tier. Easy Red 2 surprised me with how much content and battlefield variety it packed into a game that rarely gets mentioned alongside bigger World War II shooters. I spent time fighting across different fronts, using everything from rifles and machine guns to tanks and aircraft depending on the mission. What I liked most was the scale of the battles, because objectives constantly pushed the action forward while still leaving room for unexpected moments. Some of my favorite situations came from adapting after things went wrong, whether that meant scavenging equipment, taking over abandoned vehicles, or finding a new route through enemy positions. It does not have the cinematic storytelling or production values of larger franchises, but it makes up for that with freedom and variety. Those strengths are enough to earn it a place in my good tier. That's it for my ranking of World War II games. The best ones captured the chaos, tension, and scale of war, while others struggled to keep that feeling consistent throughout. Thanks for watching!